After spending 25 years in a marriage that felt like widowhood, I was suddenly reborn. When I came back, I found myself in the middle of a fierce argument with Ethan Miller about getting a divorce. The reason was simple. He had secretly invited his ex-girlfriend, Melissa Grant, to work at his company and even gave her a special promotion, making her the chief financial officer. Because of her, Ethan and I had the most intense fight we'd ever had. After he slammed the door and stormed out, I went straight to the hospital and ended my 3-month pregnancy. When I looked up at the wall calendar and realized I had returned to 1988, I pressed my aching head, exhausted and dazed, then stepped out of the bedroom. The living room was filled with the heavy smell of cigarette smoke. Ethan was leaning back on the couch, his long legs sprawled across the coffee table, smoking one cigarette after another. His fingers were half hidden in the haze of smoke. Maybe it was because of the pregnancy that I had become more sensitive, or maybe because I had inhaled that smell for more than 10 years, but I suddenly felt sick and started to vomit. Hearing the sound, Ethan turned his head, exhaling smoke, then stood up and walked toward me. His face was cold and distant, but the cigarette still burned between his fingers. After I had thrown up everything I could, I rinsed my mouth and looked at myself in the mirror. For a moment I was stunned. I looked so young again. It was the hottest time of the year in Riverton City, and there wasn't a hint of wind on the balcony. Ethan leaned lazily against the railing, looking like he couldn't care less about anything. I took a deep breath and said, "Ethan, let's get a divorce. Tomorrow morning at 10, we'll go to the civil affairs office to finalize it. Let's stop torturing each other." Before he could say anything, I lowered my head and continued, "I know there's nothing between you and Melissa, but I really don't want to keep fighting with you because of her anymore. I don't want to waste the rest of my life on something so meaningless." Seeing that he stayed silent, I looked up at him and said slowly, "This afternoon, I'm going to the hospital to end this pregnancy. Let's part peacefully. After the divorce, you can be with whoever you want, Melissa or any other woman at the company. I don't care anymore." Hearing that, Ethan finally reacted. He stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to find something in my expression. Then he stubbed out his cigarette and gave a mocking smile. "Laura, trying to act noble now? That doesn't suit you." I didn't have the strength to argue. I just muttered, "Fine," grabbed my worn-out handbag, and turned to leave. Realizing I was serious, Ethan grabbed my wrist, his expression darkening. "Laura, stop making a scene," he said coldly. "You know perfectly well that there's nothing between me and Melissa. Do you even realize how pathetic you look right now? My company is at a critical stage, and I don't have time to play childish games with you. You don't have a job, no savings, and now you want to abort my child? Who gave you that right?" Then he froze, staring at me with suspicion. I jerked my hand free from his grip and slapped him hard across the face. Smiling coldly, I said, "Ethan, do you know what I hate most about you? It's that arrogance, the way you always think you're right, that you're the only one who matters." In my previous life, Ethan had told me countless times that he and Melissa were innocent, but I never believed him. I knew very well that they always used the excuse of being friends to keep that vague, ambiguous relationship alive, never truly clean, never truly gone. The gossip among the employees, sharing a glass of wine by chance or a fleeting touch between two people, those small, ambiguous interactions were always part of a man's nature to enjoy. Ethan Miller was no exception. When I finally calmed myself, I took a deep breath, my eyes firm and steady. "Divorce," I said. "I will definitely divorce you. And as for the baby, I don't want it anymore." I knew I was being cruel to the child inside me, but I truly didn't want Ethan to ruin me again. In my previous life, it took me nearly 15 years to finally realize that Ethan had never loved me. The reason he pursued me, married me, it was all because of resentment. It all started with Melissa Grant. When she had to choose between Ethan and the son of the factory director, she chose the other man. Humiliated and unwilling to accept defeat, Ethan, encouraged by his group of reckless friends, decided to go after me instead. Back then, Laura, was 18, young, beautiful, and confident, with plenty of admirers. I was the most admired girl at the textile factory, The first one brave enough to wear a dress to work, to put on small high heels, and to curl my hair into big, elegant waves. I used to dream endlessly about my future. But all of it was destroyed by Ethan. After we got married, because I wasn't the woman he truly wanted, and because there was never any love between us, he never cared about my feelings. At that time, I didn't understand. I only knew how to get angry, throwing things around the house, venting my anxiety in whatever way I could. Until one day, I accidentally saw him with Melissa. The moment she divorced her husband, Ethan used the excuse of helping a friend to invite her into his company. He even let her move into the welfare apartment from the textile factory that we were living in. He called it a rental, but I never saw a single dollar of that rent. He treated her with the utmost care, afraid of upsetting her. Even when she was around and he was craving a cigarette, he would hold back for her sake. When his construction company grew and he became a wealthy businessman, he took her to fancy places, introduced her to his friends and business partners, people who never even knew I existed. To them, Melissa Grant was Ethan Miller's capable assistant, his confidant. Even when I fell down the stairs and, after that, somehow returned to this life, Ethan was still attending social gatherings with her, helping her expand her network, planning to invest money to help her open her own company. In Ethan's eyes, I was nothing more than someone dependent on him, a woman who cooked his meals and raised his child. Melissa, on the other hand, was the one truly by his side. She was the woman he really wanted to marry, his first love. Every time we faced each other, Ethan would say, "You wouldn't understand," his face full of irritation and disdain, before slamming the door and leaving. "Does it have to be this way?" I asked once, only for him to frown impatiently. "Laura," he said coldly, "you're already lucky. Every day, I make sure you have food to eat and don't have to work. You don't have to go out drinking with anyone else. What more do you want?" Because of my pregnancy, my health had deteriorated, and I began to experience severe bleeding. Under Ethan's persuasion, I was forced to quit my job at the textile factory and become a full-time housewife. After giving birth, I became so busy that I was utterly exhausted, my hair fell out in clumps, and I couldn't get a full night's sleep. But in Ethan's eyes, all of that was just normal. To him, I was useless, a woman who stayed home all day doing nothing. He often told people, "I'm out there working myself to death while she stays home and enjoys life. No one has it better than her." He belittled me every chance he got. He had made me completely dependent on him for survival, all while constantly praising Melissa Grant's talent and career ambition. There was always admiration in his tone whenever he mentioned her. As those thoughts flashed through my mind, I quickly hid the emotion in my eyes and nodded repeatedly. You're right," I said calmly. "Since I'm not satisfied, let's get the divorce done quickly. That way, it'll be easier for you to find some young woman who can rely on you completely." Ethan must have thought I was jealous, because the corner of his mouth lifted into a mocking smile. Loosening his collar, he said coolly, "If you've really decided to divorce me, do whatever you want. But don't regret it when you come crawling back." After saying that, he made an excuse about having work at the company and turned to leave. "Wait," I said, stopping him. "Before you go, sign the divorce papers." When he read through the document, disbelief flashed across his face. He looked up sharply, his dark eyes growing colder by the second. Then, with his face darkening, he clenched his jaw and spat out, "You've really outdone yourself this time, Laura." I smiled faintly. We both have. When he still refused to sign, I looked at him with a half smile. "What's wrong? Having second thoughts about letting me go?" He snorted. "You're getting arrogant." Ethan Miller had always been the controlling, domineering type, especially with me. He could never stand losing, not even a little. The hesitation in his eyes wasn't because of me, it was because of the baby inside me. That only made him angrier. His hand trembled slightly as he snatched the pen and signed his name on the divorce papers. Before he could change his mind, I carefully folded the document, slipped it into my bag, and said flatly, "Tomorrow morning at 10, we'll go to the Civil Affairs office." Before I could finish, the slam of the door cut me off. It was the last sound he made that night, before storming out, furious, truly furious this time. After Melissa's divorce, Ethan and I had argued about separating more than once. But every time, his family's elders would step in, and because my pregnancy was already far along, the divorce never happened. Perhaps he thought I'd never have the courage to give up the baby, or that I loved him too much to ever leave. Ridiculous. After a simple lunch that day, I went to the hospital. When I came out, the child inside me was gone. In my previous life, that same child had suffered from the misery of our broken marriage. Every time I'd mention divorce, Ethan would threaten me, saying I'd be abandoning our daughter. Because I was terrified of hurting her, terrified of making her suffer, I gave in to him again and again. One compromise after another, until my life was nothing but regret. By the time I truly saw Ethan for who he was, my youth was already gone. Yet I still kept dragging out that miserable marriage. Why did he get to live a successful, happy life with Melissa while I had to fade into the background? As long as I didn't divorce him, I was still Mrs. Miller, his lawful wife. Even if there was no love left, there was still money, stability, and a life of comfort. And our daughter would remain his only heir. Now that I'd been given a second chance, I decided to cut off my own weakness. I only hoped that in her next life, my daughter could have a complete family, with parents who truly loved her, and never have to suffer because of us. This was the late 1980s, a time when the country's economy was booming and opportunities were everywhere. It was time for me to stop, take control, and become the courageous, unafraid version of myself I once was. Maybe because he didn't want to see me, Ethan didn't come home all night. The next morning, when I called the Civil Affairs office, he had just woken up. I could faintly hear a woman's soft laughter in the background, the unmistakable voice of Melissa Grant. Then she picked up the phone and said coldly, "Laura, could you please stop causing trouble already?" "I stayed up all night to close a big contract," Ethan Miller said the next morning, his tone heavy with irritation. "I'm exhausted right now." Hearing that, I took a slow, deliberate breath and said with a bitter laugh, "Exhausted? I'm sure you are. Must have been so tired from lying in bed all night, right, Ethan? Since we're already divorced, couldn't you have waited a little before rubbing it in my face? Did you really have to go that far just to make me sick?" The staff at the Civil Affairs office exchanged looks, their expressions filled with curiosity, as if they'd just overheard something scandalous. On the other end of the line, Ethan's patience finally snapped. He let out a short, mocking laugh before gritting his teeth and saying, "Laura, weren't you just using the baby to manipulate me? You thought I wouldn't divorce you because of the child, so you started acting up to prove your existence, didn't you? I've already compromised enough because of that baby. Don't push it, you're becoming unbearable." Ethan was always too arrogant, always assuming everything revolved around him. He never once reflected on his own behavior. I didn't want to argue anymore. I spoke calmly, each word cold and deliberate. "How unfortunate," I said. "The baby you're talking about is gone, yesterday afternoon, around 3 o'clock. As soon as I finished, I heard a sharp gasp of pain from Melissa Grant on the other end of the line. A second later, Ethan shoved her aside. By the time he showed up at the Civil Affairs office, half an hour had already passed. His body reeked of alcohol and cigarettes. His bloodshot eyes and twisted expression told me just how furious he was. "How dare you, Laura?" he shouted. I took a step back, keeping my tone steady. "Why wouldn't I dare? You kept a mistress outside, one who once rejected you. Compared to someone as brainless as you, I'm like a mosquito facing an elephant. I told you, there's nothing going on." Ethan barked. "Melissa's promotion was because she's competent and fits the company's needs. Why do you always have to imagine the worst?" After snapping, he rubbed the bridge of his nose, frowning as if I were the unreasonable one. I could sense that the people nearby were about to step in to calm us down, but before they could, I said coldly, "The company apartment, the lipstick stains on your shirt, the matching outfits. Tell me, Ethan, did I wrong you about any of those?" He froze, speechless for a moment, but quickly recovered his sharpness. "So you aborted my child over a few misunderstandings?" he sneered. "How could you be so cruel, Laura? I have nothing to say about Melissa because there's nothing between us. You're just paranoid and dramatic." He said it as if everything I'd suffered, all the pain, humiliation, and despair, was my own fault. But I knew better than anyone that even if Ethan hadn't technically cheated yet, under Melissa's deliberate advances, he had already begun indulging her. He never once turned her down. After all, she was his first love, the one that got away. Her flirtation now only inflated his ego, made him feel desirable and powerful. "So you already signed the divorce agreement," I said coldly, "and you still expect me to have your child? It's broad daylight, Ethan. What kind of dream are you living in?" When I pulled out the signed divorce agreement, everyone around us turned to stare. "This is your signature, isn't it?" I said sharply. "Don't pretend you don't recognize it." He stared at the paper, disbelief spreading across his face. "You set me up, didn't you?" His tone was harsh, but the question sounded more like an accusation. "No," I said flatly. "I just came to my senses in time. What, was I supposed to suffer through a miserable pregnancy, live without respect, and let you treat me like some useless woman who can't do anything right, all because of your child?" I looked him straight in the eyes and continued firmly. "Don't forget, before all this, I was a fashion designer in the sample department at the textile factory. Every month, my monthly salary plus commission was always over $100, and half of the startup capital for your company came from me. You wouldn't even be where you are today without my help. So tell me, Ethan, how exactly do you plan to compensate me for everything I gave up for you?" Ethan frowned deeply, confusion flickering in his eyes. "So now you're blaming me?" he asked, sounding genuinely puzzled. Looking at him, this man who never once recognized his own mistakes, I suddenly felt an overwhelming exhaustion. Under his cold, questioning gaze, I handed the divorce documents to the clerk, then said slowly, "Shouldn't I blame you, Ethan? You never got over Melissa Grant, but you still married me. Even when I was pregnant, sick, and depressed, you couldn't cut ties with her. You forced her into the company just to torture me emotionally. Don't you think that's cruel? Ethan, even if you like to bully people, isn't this going too far?" Unable to hold it in anymore, I lowered my head and began to cry. The tears that had been trapped in my chest for so long finally burst free, and with them, all the suffocating weight in my heart began to lift. Ethan froze when he saw me crying, as if stunned. He hesitated, about to step forward, but when I instinctively stepped back again and again, he stopped mid-motion, his hand half raised in the air before letting it fall. After a long silence, I rasped out, my voice trembling, "Ethan, please, just let me go. Don't you see? The image of you keeps haunting me. It disgusts me." Ethan had always been proud and self-absorbed. Hearing me say that, his pride shattered. He glared at me and snapped coldly, "Fine. Divorce. Let's get this over with right now. Only a fool would stay in this marriage." The divorce procedure went by surprisingly fast. Barely 10 minutes later, when the certificate was handed over, Ethan's face was dark with fury. Without another word, he turned and stormed out. I walked out of the civil affairs office a few minutes later, watching his back disappear down the street. Then, lowering my head, I smiled faintly and turned in the opposite direction. After the divorce, I received $50,000 in settlement and the company welfare apartment that Melissa Grant had been living in. Though I loathed the idea that she had once slept under that roof, the apartment was far more valuable than the cash. In a few years, property prices in Riverton City would skyrocket, and I would make a significant profit. When news of my divorce from Ethan spread throughout the textile factory, Melissa pretended she didn't know anything and refused to move out. I had no choice but to hire a few sturdy men to help her relocate. Of course, by help, I meant throwing all of her belongings out into the yard. "Stop! What are you doing?" Melissa shouted as she arrived home from work, wearing a white blouse and black skirt. Seeing her things scattered all over the courtyard, she was livid. "Don't touch my stuff! You're trespassing. I'll call the police." She rushed to block the doorway, but the men didn't even pause. One of them pushed her aside easily. "Ma'am, please step back. We're just doing our job," one of them said flatly. "Oh, look who's home. The mistress herself," I said, crossing my arms and strolling casually out of the house. "I am not a mistress," Melissa screamed, her face flushing red with anger. "There's nothing between me and him. How dare you slander me like that?" Her voice cracked and her eyes glistened as if she were about to cry. But I didn't flinch. I looked her up and down, my tone icy. "Stop pretending. If you're not Ethan's mistress, then why have you been living here rent-free all this time? The neighbors, who had gathered to watch, began murmuring among themselves. Really? She's not paying rent? Someone whispered. If that's true, another said, then their relationship definitely isn't innocent. The mistress has already moved in, someone else added under their breath. I don't understand why Laura had to divorce him, one of the women in the crowd whispered. Shh, don't say another word. Ethan Miller is here, said a middle-aged woman, giving her a warning glance. The moment Ethan walked over, the entire area fell silent. It had only been a few days since I'd last seen him, but he looked far more worn down, his face unshaven, his eyes bloodshot, and the stench of alcohol and cigarettes clung to him so thickly it was nauseating. Laura, did you really have to rush things this far? Were his first words, and of course he was defending Melissa Grant. Yes, I shot back sharply. Just thinking about her living in my house makes me sick to my stomach. Melissa's face flushed with fury. She looked like she was about to lunge at me, but Ethan quickly held her back. He stared at me for a long time before finally giving a faint, bitter laugh. Fine, he said. I'll do as you wish. Then he turned to Melissa, his voice suddenly soft, almost tender. Melissa, I'll find you another place to live, somewhere better than this. Even as he spoke to her, his eyes flicked toward me, full of provocation, as if daring me to react. I didn't want to waste another second dealing with someone so shameless, so I turned away. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Melissa's face reddening, her cheeks glowing with a delicate pink blush. She looked bashful, almost girlish, as she smiled sweetly and said, You're troubling yourself again, Ethan. Thank you. Really. I don't know what I'd do without you. They stood there in front of me, their words growing more and more suggestive with every exchange. Watching the scene unfold, all I felt was disgust. After everything I'd endured in my previous life, this pitiful display couldn't even stir anger in me anymore, only revulsion. I let out a small, humorless laugh and said, If you two want to flirt, do it somewhere else. Don't dirty my sight with it. Melissa barely had time to react before I grabbed a broom and drove her out. Ethan followed right after her, though before leaving, he turned back and gave me a long, complicated look, one that burned with restrained anger. Not long after news of my divorce spread, my parents began pressuring me to remarry Ethan. They even threatened to disown me if I refused, just like they had in my previous life. Every couple argues, my mother scolded. If everyone divorced over small fights like you, society would be chaos. You're just too hot-tempered, that's all. She hovered around me, sighing over and over again, while I clenched my hands tightly at my sides. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. My voice was sharp as I said, Mom, do you even know that Ethan's still tangled up with his ex? She just got divorced and he ran right to her. He's treated me like dirt. Why should I keep torturing myself for him? But nothing actually happened between them, she insisted. Ethan told us himself. He's only helping her out, and besides, when you were pregnant, he made sure you were well cared for. You never lacked money or comfort. Honestly, Laura, you lived better than most women do. She sighed again and continued, Sweetheart, in life, you sometimes have to turn a blind eye. Don't be so stubborn, it'll only make things harder for yourself. Your father and I are getting older. In the future, you'll need someone to depend on. Who else will you rely on if not your husband? My mother's face was full of worry, as though I were the one in the wrong. Beside her, my father kept his head lowered, silent for a long moment before finally saying, Marriage isn't a game, Laura. If you can reconcile, then do it. That boy still cares about you, I can tell. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come here and spoken to us so politely. He still calls us Mom and Dad. Seeing how both of them were completely taken in by Ethan's act, I felt nothing but exhaustion. I no longer had the energy to explain or argue. That's impossible, I said flatly. I've already had the abortion. How could I ever go back to him? Everyone knows spilled water can't be gathered again. In my previous life, I hadn't had the courage to walk away. I'd hesitated, made excuses, and given in to weakness, until I lost every chance at happiness. If I'd been reborn only to repeat the same mistakes, then I truly deserved the pain that followed. Ever since the day I got pregnant and left my job. After that, Ethan Miller began to openly look down on me. He constantly compared me to that woman, Melissa Grant, as if I were some inferior version of her. To him, I was nothing more than a pet he'd raised, something he could control, feed, and keep dependent on him. And as if that wasn't enough, he wanted to take care of his ex too. He must have thought he could wave both flags, the red flag of his marriage at home and the yellow flag of temptation outside, and still come out proud of himself. How clever he must have felt. I knew that because of the divorce, the neighbors around us were gossiping about me, laughing behind my back. So I told them straight, "Don't worry. In a few days, I'll be leaving Riverton City. You'll only see me again during the holidays. You won't have to look at me anymore." After the divorce, I decided to leave for Beijing and start over. It wasn't just about escaping Ethan, it was about cutting all ties. My parents and sister-in-law wouldn't have to fight over me anymore, and besides, I had an aunt who lived in Beijing, so I wouldn't be completely alone there. I bought a train ticket for the next morning. My apartment was already rented out, and I didn't tell anyone the exact time I'd be leaving. Riverton was developing fast, it was time to move on. On my last day in the city, I went to the textile factory to visit and to buy some new clothes in bulk. I planned to sell them once I got to Beijing. There, I met up with my old friend Lana Yi, who still worked at the factory. When she heard I was leaving, she didn't try to talk me out of it like everyone else had. Ever since Ethan's business started making money, people had looked at me with pity or scorn. After the divorce, the gossip spread fast. Everyone said I'd had a good life and didn't know how to enjoy it, that I was a failure who couldn't keep her man. Lana just looked at me and said, "Good. That's exactly what you should do." Those simple words gave me more courage than anything else. She was right. Once upon a time, I hadn't been afraid of anything. After we discussed the profit split and I asked her to help collect my rental income, I stopped by a new supermarket nearby. That's when I unexpectedly ran into Ethan. He was at the counter buying cigarettes, surrounded by a few sycophantic friends. "Ethan, are the rumors true?" one of them asked with a smirk. "Are you really planning to marry Melissa Grant? Everyone's been talking about you two behind your back." Ethan's hand froze midair, the cigarette box pausing halfway to the counter. When he regained his composure, his face darkened immediately. "You're talking nonsense," he said coldly. "There's nothing between us." Noticing the tension in his expression, one of the men with bleached hair quickly backpedaled. Right, of course. She's divorced. She's not good enough for you anyway." That comment struck the rawest nerve in Ethan's pride. His eyes narrowed, and in the next second, he kicked the man sharply in the shin. "Who the hell are you talking about?" he snarled. "Who's divorced?" The bleached-haired man stumbled back, raising his hands defensively. "Ethan, I didn't mean you. I was just saying." But Ethan still glared at him, fury smoldering in his eyes. Realizing what he'd just implied, the man nervously asked, "Then, are you thinking about getting back together with your ex-wife?" Ethan didn't answer, and that silence said enough. The man's eyes widened in surprise before he quickly tried to recover. "Honestly, your ex-wife was a great woman," he said with forced enthusiasm. "She managed your home perfectly. Getting back together would be the smart move. I heard she hasn't found a job yet, and her family's been talking about her situation. If you go after her again now, she'd probably take you back." Before Ethan could respond, another man, a tall one with slicked back hair and a floral shirt, cut in dismissively. "Go after her? Don't be stupid. That's how she ended up spoiled in the first place. You've never been married, so you wouldn't understand. The moment you pamper a woman too much, she climbs right over your head." Ethan lit a cigarette, nodding in agreement. "You're right," he said coldly, his lips curling into a thin, bitter smile. "When she's suffered enough, when life gets too hard for her to bear, she'll come back to me. I've got time. I can wait." He paid for his cigarettes, and the group left together, still talking as they disappeared down the street. I waited until they were completely gone before I dared to move again. I stepped out from the corner, a faint, mocking smile tugging at my lips. The next morning, I quietly carried my luggage to the train station. After several days and nights of travel, I finally arrived in Beijing. A week later, with my aunt's help, I managed to rent a small room near her alleyway and began my new life as a street vendor. It was exhausting work, but Beijingers were wealthy and generous. Clothes and accessories shipped from the South were incredibly popular, and my small stall often sold out within 2 weeks. Once I had recovered my initial investment and started making a profit, I called Lana Yi, asking her to select some new styles and send them to me by train. Over the phone, Lana sounded genuinely happy when she heard how well my sales were doing in Beijing. After we finished discussing business, her tone suddenly shifted, playful and curious. "Laura," she said, "have you heard what happened with Ethan Miller and Melissa Grant?" Hearing their names made me pause for a moment. During these busy days, I'd barely thought about them, or the past at all. Even in my previous life, I had learned that people have to live in the present. Since I'd been given a second chance, I refused to let myself be consumed by the bitterness of what came before. I lowered my gaze, answering flatly, "Know what happened?" Satisfied that she had piqued my curiosity, Lana's voice brightened. "After you left, Melissa tried to take your place, to become the real boss's wife. She went all out trying to seduce Ethan. But for some reason, he completely ignored her. Recently, she even gave him something, some kind of drug, and he fired her for it. Ethan had to be hospitalized afterward, and Melissa's reputation is in ruins. Not only did she lose her position, but everyone's talking about her scandal. She's been hiding at home, too ashamed to show her face." Lana paused briefly, then added, "Oh, right. Apparently Ethan's company has shifted its main operations. I don't know who he's connected with now, but word is he's planning to expand to Beijing. If you don't want him bothering you again, you'd better keep your guard up." "Thanks, Lana," I said softly before hanging up. I sighed, feeling nothing but annoyance. The fact that Ethan's company had suddenly shifted its focus didn't surprise me at all. Knowing him, it wasn't hard to imagine the worst-case scenario. He always did things with a purpose, and I had no doubt he'd already found out where I was, probably through my parents. What I didn't understand was why he couldn't just leave me alone. Was it because his pride couldn't handle being rejected? Winter in Beijing was bitterly cold. Snow blanketed the streets as I stood in my stall, selling coats, boots, and wool sweaters. Down jackets were the most popular that season. I decided not to go home for the new year. I didn't want to endure my relatives' lectures or my friends' pity. Instead, I sent my parents 300 yuan as New Year's money. On New Year's Day, I didn't work. My aunt, who loved a comfortable, elegant life, insisted on taking care of me. I wore a light gray turtleneck sweater tucked into dark blue jeans, a black wool coat, and short ankle boots. My hair was tied up simply, exposing the smooth curve of my neck, and I wore just enough makeup to look refined and graceful. When my aunt replaced my large earrings with a pair of small pearl studs, she looked me over approvingly. "You're at the most beautiful age of your life," she said warmly. "Don't waste it. You can always make more money, but youth doesn't come back." She was right. I had spent too many years living like a shadow of myself. If I were still young, I would make sure to look beautiful every day. I laughed lightly, wrapping a scarf around my neck. "You're still fashionable as ever, Auntie." And it was true. My aunt had great taste. When she helped me with my makeup that morning, I realized just how much confidence a touch of care could bring. I really did look more radiant than before, brighter, livelier, more confident. That day, I ran into Ethan Miller at a clothing boutique. Maybe it was because of my aunt's words still lingering in my mind, but I decided to treat myself. I tried on several outfits, walked a few rounds around the store, and left with several shopping bags in hand. "Thank you for your purchase. Please come again," the clerk said cheerfully as I stepped out of the shop. But just as I turned to leave, I locked eyes with Ethan. His gaze was cold, so cold it felt like falling into an icy abyss. The air around us froze instantly. The crowd nearby went silent, and I could feel every heartbeat echoing in my chest. Within seconds, he was standing right in front of me, gripping my wrist tightly. No matter how hard I struggled, he refused to let go. Ethan looked me up and down, his face hard and expressionless. Then, with a smirk that sent chills down my spine, he said, "Dressing up like this, you must have someone special in mind." Smiling so brightly. "What's wrong? You see me and suddenly lose that smile?" "Let go," I snapped, glaring at him. His eyes were fierce, almost predatory, as though he wanted to tear me apart piece by piece. Afraid that he might actually lose control, I stopped struggling and simply stood there, waiting for him to calm down. After a long, tense moment, his grip loosened slightly. His composure began to return, though his hand still cupped the back of my neck as he forced me to look into his eyes. His voice came out low and hoarse. "Laura," he said, "I regret it. I regret divorcing you. I don't care about having kids anymore. If we get remarried, whether you want children or not is up to you. You want to work? Fine. I'll support you completely." Hearing words like that from Ethan Miller felt surreal, like witnessing a miracle. In my previous life, when I made my first profits trading stocks and used the money to open a small tea shop, he had accused me of being greedy. Now, hearing him say these things made my stomach turn. His hand still gripping me, I turned my head aside, trying to contain the disgust boiling inside me. After a moment of silence, I said quietly but firmly, "Ethan, we're divorced. We're two separate people now. You need to move on." But he pressed on, his voice rough with restraint. "I really regret it, Laura. Let's start over. I know I was awful before, but believe me, I never betrayed you. What happened with Melissa Grant, that was just me being foolish, feeding my ego. I've already fired her. She won't bother you again. When I married you, it was because I loved you, not for any other reason." I stayed quiet for a while, then lifted my eyes to meet his. My voice was calm, steady. "Whether you regret it or not, doesn't matter anymore. Because I don't love you, Ethan. A marriage without love is just an empty shell, a performance for others to see. Counting my previous life, I've already spent over 25 years, living like a widow in our marriage. That's more than enough." "Laura?" A warm male voice suddenly interrupted from behind. I turned and saw Jason Reed standing near the store entrance with his 4-year-old daughter, Nina. "Daddy, who's that?" the little girl asked sweetly, holding up a string of candied apples. She started to run toward me, but Jason quickly caught her hand, stopping her. Watching their interaction, I noticed a flash of anger flicker in Ethan's eyes. His mouth twisted into a cruel, mocking smile. "So that's it? You found someone new? You left me for this?" He sneered. "You're really gonna be a stepmother now? How pathetic." The venom in his tone cut through the air like glass. I took a deep breath, lifted my chin, and looked him straight in the eye. "You're right," I said clearly. "I'd rather be someone else's stepmother and have children with another man." I didn't want to be with him anymore. I didn't want to have his children. Under Ethan Miller's cold, venomous gaze, I simply smiled faintly and said nothing. My calmness and the way I looked at him must have struck straight at his heart, right where it hurt the most. When I felt his grip on me loosen slightly, I bit my lip and carefully pried each of his fingers off my arm before forcefully shoving his hand away. The tension lingered in the air even after I left. On the way back, the silence between Jason Reed and me felt awkward. After a while, I finally spoke. "That man just now, he's my ex-husband," I said quietly. "He can be difficult. I only said those things to make him leave. Please don't take it the wrong way." I tapped my forehead with embarrassment. Jason smiled gently. "I figured as much. Don't worry, I didn't think too much of it. It was in fact through his daughter Nina that Jason and I first met. Only later did I learn that he was a university professor, one of the youngest and most respected academics in the city. He had the quiet refinement of a scholar, always calm and composed, with the polite confidence of a true gentleman. Tall, well-groomed, and principled, he was the kind of man who drew people in without trying. If not for his ex-wife, who had insisted on divorcing him so she could go abroad, Jason's family of 3 might still have been perfectly happy. Lost in thought, I didn't notice that Jason had wanted to speak but hesitated several times. It wasn't until little Nina darted off to buy a skewer of candied fruit from a nearby stall, her laughter mixing with the playful shouts of children echoing down the alley, that he finally stopped walking. "Laura," he said softly, turning toward me, "those things you said earlier." Before he could finish, I suddenly blurted out, "Oh, it's snowing again." I stretched out my hand, letting the light snowflakes melt against my cold skin. The chill bit at my palm, but I didn't pull away. "You know," I said quietly, watching the snow fall, "this is the first time I've ever really seen snow like this. It's so white, so peaceful. It almost feels unreal." Then I blinked, smiled, and added, "Oh right, I'm moving soon. I bought a small shop with a living space above it on Huan Street. I plan to start my own business there. I probably won't come by much anymore, maybe just to visit my aunt now and then. I turned toward him with a smile. Nina's a sweet girl. She loves playing and eating sweets. You should let your relatives help watch her more often. You never know what kind of people are out there these days. It's better to be careful. Jason was an intelligent man. He understood the meaning behind my words almost immediately. After a long silence, he looked away toward Nina, forcing a small smile. Then I wish you all the best, Laura, he said softly. May your business prosper. Thank you, I said sincerely. Then I crouched down in front of Nina, slipping a big red envelope into her coat pocket. After we parted ways, I hurried home, my breath fogging in the cold air. The moment I stepped into my aunt's old courtyard house, I finally exhaled in relief. Inside, my aunt was lying on her rocking chair, listening to the radio. Hearing me come in, she turned her head and smiled. Did you have fun today? She asked. Mrs. Lee stopped by earlier. She said she saw you walking home with Jason Reed. Are you too? Nothing like that. I interrupted quickly, flustered. We just ran into each other by chance. His daughter, Nina, was there too. Seeing how quickly I denied it, my aunt sighed and said gently, You know, for a divorced woman like you, Jason really is a good choice. Yes, he already has a daughter, but Nina's a sweet, well-behaved child who adores you. You don't need to worry about not getting along with her. She set down her teacup and looked at me earnestly. I've lived here for more than 35 years. I know this neighborhood and the people in it. Jason comes from a good, respectable family. He's kind, steady, and has a good heart. You're a woman, Laura. You don't have to be so strong all the time. It's okay to let yourself think about happiness again. I knew she meant well. She genuinely wanted what was best for me. Most people her age still held traditional beliefs, not as open-minded as the younger generation. But deep down, I wasn't ready. Not yet. Little Nina truly was a sweet child, but I had no desire to become her stepmother. I didn't want to speak too harshly to my aunt, because she genuinely meant well. Everything she said about Jason Reed and his family was true. They really were good people. But what I wanted was a life of freedom and peace, one that didn't require me to bend myself into someone else's shape. That kind of life simply didn't suit a man like him. So I sat down beside her, gently took her hand, and said sincerely, Even if Jason and his family are wonderful, Auntie, being with him would mean I'd have to sacrifice parts of myself. She frowned slightly, not fully understanding, so I decided to be more direct. For example, I continued, if I ever did marry Jason, no matter how much Nina might like me, he'd still have to balance his love between me and his daughter. Conflicts are bound to happen. I could never win against a child, nor would I want to. And to be honest, I'm selfish. I don't have the selflessness required for that kind of role. Raising a child is hard enough when it's your own, let alone someone else's. And then there's Nina's mother, I went on softly. She only went abroad. She didn't disappear. If one day she comes back, how would Jason and Nina treat her? Who knows? And if they can't bear to let her go again, what am I supposed to do then? I've already had enough of men's first loves, old flames, and sentimental ex-wives. I'm done with that kind of pain. My aunt still seemed ready to persuade me, but I rested my chin on my hand and said seriously, Marriage itself is complicated. If you marry someone stronger than you, you'll be swallowed up. If you marry someone weaker, you'll end up compensating for them. Auntie, I'm a businesswoman. I know the value of things, and I calculate my costs carefully. That's why remarriage has never been in my plans. Marriage isn't the only path for a woman. I don't need a husband to prove my worth. I have money, a home, a sharp mind, and, if I ever want it, love. I don't lack for anything. Hearing that, my aunt finally stopped trying to convince me. She realized that I was truly content, that my life was already full and balanced in a way that didn't need fixing. The worries that used to consume her no longer applied to me. After that conversation, I threw myself fully into expanding my business. I moved on from small street stalls to managing a proper clothing brand. My work flourished, my designs sold quickly, and my profits grew steadily. That was when Ethan Miller reappeared, trying once again to worm his way back into my life. But no matter how persistent he was, I never once looked at him kindly. Whether he pretended to be drunk and poured out fake affection or feigned sorrow to gain sympathy, I treated him like nothing more than a clown performing for attention. Because no matter what, the wounds he had inflicted on me were real. Time had healed them, but the scars remained. I was never the kind of person who believed a shattered mirror could be made whole again. I believed in moving forward. Once it's over, it's over. So why should a man who once crushed me under his pride think he could come back, say I'm sorry, and expect me to forgive him as if nothing had happened? When my eyes grew colder with each passing meeting, Ethan finally stopped pushing. He changed tactics, trying to win me over with gentleness instead of force. But by then, I no longer cared. Years later, when I had earned more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, I bought a beautiful villa with a wide garden in a peaceful third-tier city. There I began living the quiet, leisurely life I had always dreamed of, far away from Ethan and all the noise he represented. Even if I never went out, even if the world forgot me, I was content. Ethan could no longer touch my peace. I ignored him for 25 years. Then, when he was 45, Ethan Miller was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. As he lay dying in a hospital bed, his family tried calling me again and again, but I never picked up. Not even when the doctor finally pronounced him dead. Because as I had always promised myself, I truly did it. I never forgave him. Not in this life. Epilogue. The day Laura fell down the stairs and was reborn. When the news spread that Laura had fallen down the stairs and died instantly, everyone was stunned. Ethan Miller and his daughter Anna Miller rushed home as soon as they received the news. Inside the dimly lit room, the smell of medicine and cold air lingered. The moment Anna stepped in, she saw her father cradling her mother's lifeless body, completely hysterical. "Laura, stop pretending," Ethan shouted, shaking her as if trying to wake her up. "Didn't you want me to come back? I'm here now. What more do you want from me? If you hadn't been so stubborn, so distant, always acting like you didn't care, why would I have ever thought of using Melissa Grant just to make you jealous?" Unable to bear hearing him demean her mother even in death, Anna shoved him hard, prying him away from the corpse. She held Laura tightly in her arms, glaring at him with pure disgust. "She's dead," Anna said coldly. "Who exactly are you pretending to mourn for? Just as my mother always said, you're a shameless man." Her voice trembled as tears filled her eyes. "When she was alive, all she ever wanted was a little respect from you, as her husband. But what did you give her instead? You spent your time flirting with another woman, showing off your affection like it was something to be proud of. Don't you dare call that an accident. You hurt her, again and again. If it weren't for me, if she hadn't stayed just to protect me from you and that woman, she would have left long ago. She could have had a life without you." Her words cracked as pain overtook her voice. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. He stood frozen, his face pale, unable to form a single word. Anna's tears streamed down her face, no matter how many times she tried to wipe them away. Every time Ethan reached toward her, she recoiled violently, kicking him back, her grief twisting into fury. She wanted to hurt him, to make him feel even a fraction of the agony he had caused. "Do you know what this is?" she shouted, yanking a jade bracelet off her mother's wrist and shoving it toward him. "Look at this scar." She pointed to a long, ugly mark across Laura's arm. "She cut herself after giving birth to me, because she was exhausted and depressed. And where were you then? What were you doing? You were calling her useless, annoying, saying she wasn't good enough for you. She told you she was sick, and you ignored her. Everyone around her bullied her, and you just stood there." Her voice rose to a scream, shaking with fury. "You destroyed her, Ethan. You broke her spirit long before her body gave out." He stumbled backward, face drained of color. "I didn't know. I just—" But the words died in his throat. After Laura was buried, Ethan began to drown himself in alcohol. Years passed, and his health deteriorated rapidly. Within 3 years, he was frail, powerless, and bedridden. His only child, Anna, gradually took control of his company. Because Ethan had only one heir, no one in the corporation dared to challenge her. Even those who despised her could do nothing but swallow their resentment. Once in charge, Anna didn't disappoint. She restructured the business completely, starting with one decisive move, cutting all ties with Melissa Grant's construction firm. Her public reason was simple. The company's building materials contained dangerously high levels of formaldehyde. Effective immediately, the Miller Group would no longer cooperate. Melissa's company, barely a year old, couldn't withstand the blow. Without Ethan's backing, no clients dared to work with her. Payments stopped, employees quit, and within months, the firm began to collapse. Panicked and desperate, Melissa finally turned to Ethan for help. But when Anna learned that Melissa had come to their house, she kicked the door open and stormed in. Her hand flew before anyone could stop her. Smack! The sound of her slap echoed through the room. "I'm the one in charge of the Miller family now," Anna said icily. "Weren't you always calling yourself an independent woman? So what now? Looks like the mighty career woman isn't so powerful without a man behind her." Her tone dripped with mockery. Before Melissa could defend herself, Anna pointed at Ethan, who was trembling on the couch. "Too bad," she said coldly. "That man you're begging from? He's just a washed-up old fool now. If you really want him, you can have him. I don't care. The company's mine. And after years of leeching off my mother, he's not even capable of fathering another child." The room fell silent. Ethan's face twisted with humiliation, while Melissa's eyes widened in horror. Anna stood there, her chest rising and falling, her expression cold as stone. For once in his life, Ethan Miller had nothing left to say. "There's someone out there willing to serve him without taking a cent," Anna Miller said coldly. "As his daughter, I suppose I should be happy for him." Her words hung in the air like shards of ice. One person was stunned, the other, Ethan Miller, gave a bitter, broken laugh. "So that's it," he murmured hoarsely, eyes dull with regret. "All this time, you never believed in me at all." Anna crossed her arms, her expression emotionless. "Believe you?" she sneered. "I'd sooner believe a pig could climb a tree." Her cruel sarcasm stung worse than any slap, and Ethan's face collapsed into despair. Only then did he realize, after all these years, his entire life had become a tragic joke. Because of the deep influence Laura had left on her, Anna eventually decided never to marry. If she ever wanted a child, she would choose the best genetic material from a sperm bank and carry the pregnancy herself. She wanted control over her life, her choices, and her happiness. No man would ever define that for her. And so, in their separate worlds, father and daughter each lived their own version of what they called happiness. Ethan, now frail and defeated, was kept under house supervision in the same villa that once belonged to Laura. Anna allowed him freedom to walk around the estate, but forbade him from ever stepping into her mother's bedroom. "You're not worthy," she had told him coldly. Not only that, she ignored his repeated pleas to be buried beside Laura when his time came. "You disgusted her in life," she said sharply. "Why should I let you pollute her peace in death? I won't let you taint her path to the next life." Ethan Miller died full of regret. No one knew how long had passed before he opened his eyes again. When he did, he found himself young once more, his surroundings vibrant, alive, achingly familiar. He couldn't tell if it was a dream or reality, but one thing was certain. Laura was alive, and she was radiant, more beautiful, more brilliant than she had ever been, even compared to the first time he'd met her. Yet everything had changed. They were divorced. Their daughter no longer existed. The love between them had turned to ash. Still, Ethan convinced himself that if he could be sincere enough, gentle enough, perhaps one day she would forgive him. But even when he was stricken with lung cancer, enduring the agony of chemotherapy, his body wasting away, his spirit crushed, Laura never softened. Not once. It was only then, in the face of death, that Ethan Miller finally understood. Laura's hatred for him ran so deep, it had seeped into her very bones.